No one expected Nathaniel Ashford to pause an international negotiation because of a catering mistake. The most influential businessman on the East Coast was minutes away from approving an agreement that would reshape billions of dollars in global trade when an ordinary delivery woman stumbled into the room carrying lunch. Embarrassed, Elena Brooks apologized, gathered the folders she had accidentally knocked aside, and prepared to leave. Then she overheard a quiet conversation in Russian. Her expression changed instantly. Before anyone could escort her out, she calmly repeated the same message in English, then in Italian, French, and Spanish, exposing a translation that meant something completely different from what everyone believed. The room fell silent. Why would a woman everyone dismissed understand 5 languages so effortlessly? And what had she discovered that every highly paid expert in the room had completely overlooked? For nearly 12 years, Elena Brooks had built her life around being unnoticed. Every morning before sunrise, she tied back her chestnut hair, slipped into the same navy delivery jacket, and mapped out a dozen routes across Manhattan. Restaurants, office towers, private residences. It made little difference. She carried meals, documents, and catered orders to people whose names regularly appeared on magazine covers, while most of them never bothered to look at the woman standing at their doors. That had never surprised her. People rarely looked beyond appearances. At 32, Elena had a naturally curvy, plus-size figure, a warm smile that softened her youthful face, and bright hazel eyes that sparkled whenever she laughed. Even beneath her plain delivery uniform, there was an effortless charm about her. She wasn't the kind of woman who turned heads with expensive fashion or dramatic beauty. Instead, she possessed the approachable, wholesome attractiveness that made people feel comfortable around her. Unfortunately, most people never noticed. The oversized delivery jacket, practical sneakers, and insulated food bags became the only things they saw. Before Elena had the chance to say more than a few words, strangers often assumed she was just another courier passing through their busy day. They never asked about the evenings she had spent beside her father in a small apartment filled with dictionaries and recordings from around the world. Victor Brooks had never become wealthy. He had spent decades working as a conference interpreter, moving effortlessly between English, Italian, French, Spanish, and Russian. When illness forced him to stay home, Elena abandoned her final year of college to care for him while working multiple jobs to support the family. During those long nights, language lessons became their routine. While other people watched television, father and daughter translated political speeches, classic novels, documentaries, and international news broadcasts. Her father often smiled and repeated the same lesson. A language isn't just words, it's intention. Listen carefully enough, and people will always reveal more than they mean to. Even after he passed away, Elena never stopped practicing. She simply stopped telling people. What was the point? No delivery application asked how many languages its drivers spoke. Across the city, another morning was beginning very differently. Inside the penthouse headquarters of Ashford International Holdings, every executive on the 42nd floor moved with unusual urgency. Assistants hurried through corridors carrying confidential files. Security officers checked guest lists for the 3rd time. Luxury vehicles arrived one after another beneath the private entrance. Today's meeting had taken 6 months to arrange. Representatives from Europe, South America, and North America were gathering to negotiate a shipping partnership that would influence ports, logistics, and trade routes worth billions of dollars. For most corporations, it would be the biggest meeting in company history. For Nathaniel Ashford, it was simply another Thursday. Tall, composed, and impeccably dressed, Nathaniel entered the boardroom without raising his voice. The conversations around him faded almost instantly. He had earned that kind of silence over 2 decades of disciplined leadership. He never relied on theatrics. He rarely repeated an instruction. and he had built a reputation for noticing details others ignored. Yet that morning, even he sensed something was wrong. His executive assistant approached quietly. "Mr. Ashford, Samuel still hasn't arrived." Nathaniel stopped walking. Samuel Green had interpreted every international negotiation for almost 11 years. He had never been late. Not once. "Has anyone reached him?" The assistant shook her head. "His phone is switched off." Nathaniel frowned ever so slightly. That tiny expression was enough to unsettle everyone nearby. Within minutes, security personnel traced Samuel's last known location to a parking garage 3 blocks away. His car remained untouched. His briefcase was still inside. Only his phone had been found lying on the concrete floor. No explanation. No message. Nothing. The room grew noticeably quieter. Several international delegates had already begun arriving downstairs. Postponing the meeting would send an unfortunate signal to every organization represented today. Continuing, without a trusted interpreter, introduced a different kind of uncertainty. Nathaniel weighed both options in silence. Finally he spoke. "We proceed." An executive hesitated. "But the translations." "We proceed." No one questioned the decision again. A temporary interpreter supplied through one of the visiting delegations was escorted upstairs. Nathaniel acknowledged him politely, but made no attempt to hide his disappointment. Trust could not be established in 5 minutes. Several miles away, Elena's phone buzzed with another delivery notification. Large catering order. Priority. Destination, Ashford International Holdings. She glanced at the unusually generous tip attached to the order. "Well," she muttered with a smile, "someone must be having a very important lunch." Balancing insulated containers on a rolling cart, she entered the towering glass headquarters exactly 12 minutes ahead of schedule. The receptionist looked overwhelmed. "Delivery?" "Yes." "Conference floor." "Service entrance." The receptionist quickly nodded while answering another ringing phone. 42nd floor. Elena thanked her and hurried toward the elevator. She never noticed that another employee had intended to stop her. The service elevator had temporarily broken down. She had been directed to the executive floor by mistake. When the elevator doors opened, the atmosphere changed immediately. The hallway was lined with elegantly dressed guests, speaking in several different languages. Security personnel stood discreetly along the walls. Large double doors at the end of the corridor remained partially open. Elena slowed her pace. "This doesn't look like a lunch meeting." Before she could turn back, one of the assistants noticed the catering cart. "Oh, thank goodness you're here." Without waiting for an explanation, the assistant opened the boardroom doors wider. "Right this way." Elena took a slow breath. Something told her she had just walked into the wrong room, and within the next few minutes, that simple mistake would change the course of her life forever. The conference room fell silent as Elena pushed the catering cart across the polished floor. For a brief moment, she convinced herself that perhaps this really was where she was supposed to be. Then she noticed the faces around the table. Some wore tailored European suits, others traditional accessories that hinted at cultures far beyond New York. Small national flags marked each seating position. Thick folders stamped confidential lay neatly arranged before every delegate. This was no ordinary business lunch. A young assistant hurried toward her. "Just set everything on the side table, please." Elena nodded quickly. "Of course. Sorry if I'm a little early." The assistant offered a distracted smile before returning to the discussion. No one paid much attention to her. Exactly the way Elena preferred. She quietly unloaded coffee, bottled water, sandwiches, pastries, and neatly labeled lunchboxes, while conversations resumed around the room. From the head of the table, Nathaniel Ashford listened more than he spoke. His calm presence seemed to anchor the meeting. Whenever conflicting opinions surfaced, every eye eventually returned to him. He wasn't the loudest person in the room. He simply carried the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of people. Elena had almost finished arranging the last tray when a voice behind her interrupted. "I didn't realize they were sending deliveries directly into executive meetings now." The remark carried a polished sweetness that barely concealed its criticism. Elena turned. A striking woman in an elegant cream-colored suit approached with measured confidence. Every detail of her appearance, from her tailored jacket to her diamond earrings, seemed carefully chosen. This was Celeste Harrington, Ashford International's Director of Public Relations. She glanced at the delivery cart before looking Elena up and down. "I assume someone forgot to explain the service entrance." "I'm sorry," Elena replied politely. "The receptionist directed me here." Celeste smiled, though there was little warmth in it. "I'm sure she did." Several nearby executives exchanged awkward glances. Celeste continued. "Well, at least lunch arrived." Her gaze settled briefly on Elena's insulated delivery jacket. "It certainly adds a casual atmosphere." A few quiet chuckles drifted through the room. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks. She had experienced moments like this before. People who believed kindness became optional once they assumed someone occupied a lower place in life. Instead of responding, she lowered her eyes and continued placing coffee cups onto the serving table. Nathaniel looked up briefly. His expression remained unreadable. He neither encouraged the comments nor interrupted them. His attention returned to the negotiations. Across the table, representatives began reviewing translated copies of the proposed agreement. The temporary interpreter cleared his throat. "We'll begin with the revised shipping framework." Everyone opened their folders. The room settled into businesslike concentration. Elena quietly stacked the empty catering containers onto her cart. Only one tray remained. As she reached for it, she heard two men speaking softly near the windows. Russian. It wasn't unusual. Several international delegates had been speaking different languages throughout the morning. Normally, Elena would never pay attention, but one phrase caught her immediately. The older man speaking was Mikhail Orlov, one of the foreign delegates representing a powerful logistics consortium. His voice remained low enough that few people seemed to notice. Beside him stood another delegate, pretending to study the documents. Mikhail spoke calmly. "Once the signatures are complete, they'll never realize Clause 12 changes ownership authority." The second man answered with a slight nod. "And if anyone questions the translation," Mikhail smiled faintly, "they won't. Their interpreter is reading exactly what we prepared." Elena stared at the coffee tray in her hands. Her heartbeat quickened. Maybe she had misunderstood. She listened again. The men continued. "The original wording transfers operational control after 30 days. But the English version only mentions temporary management." Exactly. Elena's fingers tightened around the tray. That wasn't a minor wording difference. Those two phrases carried completely different legal meanings. Across the room, the temporary interpreter continued reading aloud with perfect confidence. Nathaniel studied the translated document without changing expression. No one appeared suspicious. No one seemed aware that the spoken explanation differed from the Russian conversation happening only a few feet away. Elena looked toward the conference doors. She could leave. It wasn't her meeting. It wasn't her responsibility. She was only supposed to deliver lunch. Her father had spent years teaching her one lesson above all others. A translator carries trust. If the translation changes, everything changes. She slowly took a step toward the exit. Then another. Her hand reached the door handle. She paused. Behind her, Mikhail quietly added one final sentence in Russian. "By tomorrow afternoon, Mr. Ashford will personally approve an agreement that benefits everyone, except himself." Elena closed her eyes for a brief second. She knew exactly what those words meant. and she knew that if she walked away now, no one else in the room would ever hear them. Elena's hand remained on the door handle. She could still leave. Within 30 seconds, the elevator doors would close behind her, and this meeting would become someone else's responsibility. By tomorrow, she would be delivering coffee to another office, pretending today had never happened. That was the safer choice. It was also the wrong one. She turned around. The delegates were already reviewing the final pages of the agreement, while the temporary interpreter continued explaining each clause with practiced confidence. Nathaniel Ashford lifted his pen. "If there are no further questions," he said evenly, "we can move forward." Elena heard herself speak before she had fully decided to. "Please, don't sign that." Her voice wasn't loud. Yet in the silence of the boardroom, every word landed with startling clarity. Conversations stopped instantly. More than 20 pairs of eyes turned toward the delivery woman standing beside the exit. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Celeste Harrington broke the silence first. "I'm sorry?" Elena swallowed. I think there's a mistake." A faint smile crossed Celeste's face. "The catering has been delivered." "I don't mean the lunch." Several executives exchanged puzzled glances. Nathaniel rested his pen on the table without saying a word. His expression remained calm, but his attention was now entirely focused on Elena. Celeste stepped forward. Miss Brooks, Celeste said politely. "This meeting involves legal advisors, international executives, and professional interpreters. I'm sure you understand why this isn't the appropriate moment." "I do. Then perhaps. But the translation isn't accurate." The room grew noticeably quieter. The temporary interpreter frowned. "I beg your pardon?" Elena looked toward him. "I believe Clause 12 has been translated incorrectly." A ripple of disbelief spread around the table. The interpreter straightened. "I translated the document exactly as provided." Elena nodded. "I believe that's the problem." Before anyone could respond, Mikhail Orlov spoke for the first time since she'd interrupted. In flawless Russian, he said calmly, "She has no idea what she's talking about." Most people in the room waited for the interpreter. Elena didn't. Without hesitation, she answered in equally fluent Russian. "Actually, I understood every word you've spoken since I entered this room." Silence. Complete silence. Mikhail's composed expression flickered for the first time. Several delegates stared at Elena in disbelief. The temporary interpreter looked from one speaker to the other, visibly caught off guard. Elena continued speaking in Russian, her pronunciation clear and effortless. "You told your colleague that once the agreement is signed, operational control would quietly change hands within 30 days. You also said the English version hides that change by describing it as temporary management." She stopped, then switched naturally into English. Those are not equivalent legal terms. Every face in the room turned toward the contract. Nathaniel slowly closed the folder in front of him. His eyes never left Elena. One of the French delegates leaned back in his chair, speaking quietly to the colleague beside him. In French, he muttered. "Impossible. She's guessing." Without even looking in his direction, Elena replied in fluent French. "No, sir. I'm translating exactly what you just said." The delegate froze. His colleague stared at him. Another stunned silence settled over the room. An Italian executive frowned. Incredible. Then, almost instinctively, he tested her. He asked a complicated question in rapid Italian about contractual liability and maritime authority. Elena answered immediately. Her grammar was flawless. Her tone remained respectful. There wasn't the slightest hesitation. The executive slowly lowered his glasses. "I don't believe this." Across the table, a representative from Madrid whispered something to his assistant in Spanish. He hadn't intended anyone else to understand. Elena smiled politely before responding in the same language. I agree with your concern. The wording is unusually vague. The man blinked twice, then laughed softly in disbelief. I wasn't expecting an answer. Neither was anyone else. The atmosphere inside the room shifted almost imperceptibly. Just minutes earlier, Elena Brooks had been an unnoticed delivery driver, quietly arranging coffee cups. Now every conversation had stopped, because she appeared to understand every language spoken around the table. Nathaniel finally broke the silence. Miss Brooks. Yes? How many languages do you speak? She hesitated. 5. And you've understood this meeting from the moment you walked in. I wasn't trying to listen, Elena admitted. But once I realized something didn't match. She glanced toward the documents. I couldn't ignore it. Nathaniel studied her for several long seconds. Unlike the others, he wasn't impressed simply because she spoke multiple languages. He was trying to answer a different question. If she was telling the truth, then either his interpreter had made a catastrophic mistake, or someone had planned the mistake from the beginning. He turned slowly toward the temporary interpreter. Read Clause 12 again. The interpreter adjusted his glasses. This version is accurate. Nathaniel's voice remained perfectly calm. I didn't ask for your opinion. He looked back at Elena. Miss Brooks. She nodded. I'd like you to translate the original Russian version. Every eye in the room shifted toward her once again. Elena took a slow breath. She had never imagined that delivering lunch would place her at the center of the most important negotiation in the country. And she knew that whatever happened next, there would be no returning to the quiet life she had walked in with. Nathaniel slid the original Russian document across the polished table. The room became so quiet that the faint hum of the air conditioning suddenly felt unusually loud. No one moved. No one interrupted. Elena looked at the pages without touching them immediately. I'm not a lawyer, she said honestly. If I misunderstand a legal expression, you should have your legal team verify every line. Nathaniel gave a slight nod. I wouldn't expect anything less. His answer settled her nerves. She picked up the document. The first paragraphs matched the English version almost perfectly. Standard language, corporate formalities, financial commitments. Nothing unusual. Then she reached Clause 12. Her expression changed. Nathaniel noticed it immediately. What is it? Elena looked up. The wording isn't the same. The temporary interpreter folded his arms. That's a matter of interpretation. Elena calmly shook her head. No. She pointed to a sentence written in Russian. This phrase doesn't describe temporary operational management. She traced the next line with her finger. It describes the permanent transfer of decision-making authority after a 30-day transition period. Several attorneys around the table immediately opened their own copies. One began comparing the English translation line by line. Another adjusted his glasses and leaned closer. Within seconds, quiet whispers spread across the room. Nathaniel remained perfectly still. What would that change mean in practice? Elena answered carefully. It would mean the organization that receives operational authority could legally make major decisions before anyone realizes ownership has effectively shifted. One of the company's senior legal advisors suddenly looked up. She's right. Every head turned toward him. The attorney flipped several pages back and forth before speaking again. The Russian terminology is much stronger than the English translation. He looked directly at Nathaniel. This isn't a wording preference. He paused. It changes the legal effect of the agreement. A heavy silence settled over the room. The temporary interpreter's confidence disappeared. There must be some misunderstanding. Nathaniel finally looked at him. You assured us this translation was accurate. It is mostly accurate. Mostly. Sweat appeared along the interpreter's forehead. Certain expressions don't translate directly. Before Nathaniel could respond, Elena spoke gently. That's true. Everyone looked toward her. Some expressions don't have perfect equivalence. She placed one page beside the translated version, but when translators can't find an exact equivalent, they explain the meaning. She tapped the paragraph. They don't replace it with something completely different. No one argued. Because no one could. Across the table, Mikhail Orlov remained surprisingly calm. Too calm. He slowly closed his folder. This discussion seems unnecessary. Nathaniel's eyes shifted toward him. Does it? Mikhail offered a pleasant smile. If there are concerns, we can simply postpone today's meeting. Several delegates appeared relieved by the suggestion. It sounded reasonable, professional, diplomatic. Yet something about his timing troubled Elena. He had spoken almost immediately after the incorrect translation was exposed, as though ending the meeting mattered more than correcting the agreement. She studied him quietly. Then she noticed something else. His assistant had been unusually silent throughout the discussion. The young man wasn't watching the documents. He was watching Nathaniel. More specifically, he kept glancing toward Nathaniel's leather portfolio lying beside his chair, only for a second at a time, but repeatedly. Elena remembered another lesson from her father. People reveal their priorities with their eyes long before they reveal them with words. She continued observing. Again, the assistant's gaze drifted toward the portfolio, then toward Mikhail. The two exchanged the smallest nod, barely noticeable, almost invisible, unless someone happened to be looking at exactly that moment. Elena felt a quiet uneasiness. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe she was imagining connections that didn't exist. Then she heard another whisper, Russian, soft, quick, almost impossible to distinguish beneath the conversations restarting around the room. Without changing expression, Mikhail murmured, "If this fails, we move to the second option." His assistant answered just as quietly, "Understood." Elena's pulse quickened. Second option? What second option? Nathaniel was already speaking with his legal advisors. No one else appeared to have heard the exchange. She hesitated. Interrupting once had already been extraordinary. Doing it again. She wasn't even sure anyone would believe her. At that moment, Nathaniel looked across the room. Their eyes met. Perhaps it was instinct. Perhaps he had simply noticed the concern on her face. "What is it?" he asked. Elena took a slow breath. "I think." She chose her words carefully. "I think today's translation wasn't the only thing that was planned." The room fell silent once more. Nathaniel didn't speak immediately. Instead, he watched her with the same steady focus he had maintained since she first questioned the contract. "What makes you say that?" Elena glanced toward Mikhail before answering. "Because a few seconds ago," she paused, "he mentioned a second option." For the first time that afternoon, the faint smile disappeared from Mikhail Orlov's face. Nathaniel noticed it. So did everyone else. No accusation had been made. No proof had yet been presented. But the atmosphere inside the boardroom changed completely. The discussion was no longer about correcting a contract. It had become something far more uncertain. And everyone in the room suddenly realized the meeting was far from over. Nathaniel didn't look at Mikhail. He looked at Elena. "What exactly did you hear?" Every person in the room waited for her answer. Elena chose her words with care. He said, "If this fails, we move to the second option." She paused before adding, "I don't know what the second option is, but I know that's what he said." Nathaniel gave a slight nod. "Thank you." He turned toward Mikhail. "Would you like to explain?" Mikhail remained remarkably composed. "I'd be happy to." He folded his hands on the table. "My assistant asked what we should do if today's discussion ended without an agreement. I replied that we'd move to a second option." He smiled politely. A future meeting. Several delegates exchanged uncertain looks. It sounded reasonable. Too reasonable. Nathaniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked toward Elena again. "You don't believe that's what he meant?" She hesitated. I can't prove otherwise. Tell me what concerns you. Elena glanced down at the contract. People usually choose words that match the situation. Everyone listened. If he simply meant scheduling another meeting, there were easier ways to say it. She looked toward Mikhail. Instead, he used a phrase that suggested a prepared alternative. One of the German delegates slowly nodded. In Russian, she's correct. Several heads turned toward him. He continued. The wording implies a backup plan that already exists. The silence returned. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair. For the last hour, he said calmly, Miss Brooks has corrected a translation, identified a legal discrepancy, and accurately interpreted conversations in multiple languages. He looked at Mikhail. So forgive me if I'm inclined to keep listening. For the first time, Mikhail's confidence showed the slightest crack. His assistant shifted uneasily beside him. Nathaniel noticed. So did Elena. She wasn't watching Mikhail anymore. She was watching the young assistant. His fingers tapped nervously against a leather portfolio resting beside his chair. 3 quick taps. A pause. Then 2 more. Not random. Almost as if he were reminding himself of something. Or waiting. Elena's eyes drifted to the portfolio. A corner of a folded document was sticking out just enough to reveal a familiar company logo. Ashford International. Her heart skipped. That folder shouldn't be there. Nathaniel's legal team had collected every official copy before the meeting began. Why did Mikhail's assistant have another one? She stepped a little closer. Mr. Ashford! Nathaniel turned. I think there's another document, Mikhail answered, before Nathaniel could. Those are simply my notes. Elena looked directly at him. Then you won't mind showing them. A brief silence followed. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. Nathaniel noticed Mikhail's hesitation. So would you. The assistant instinctively reached for the portfolio. Nathaniel's head of security calmly stepped beside him. I'll take that. No, Mikhail replied smoothly. There's no need. Nathaniel's voice remained even. I disagree. The assistant reluctantly handed over the leather portfolio. Inside were meeting notes, financial projections, and another contract. It looked almost identical to the one already on the table. Almost. Nathaniel opened it. His legal advisor moved beside him. Within moments, his eyebrows rose. This version, he turned another page, contains additional amendments. Several executives leaned forward. The attorney compared both documents side by side. They're not the same. Nathaniel looked toward Elena. Can you read the Russian annotations? She accepted the document carefully. Most of the text matched the original agreement. Then she reached several handwritten notes along the margins. Her expression changed. What is it? Nathaniel asked. These annotations weren't written by the translator. She continued reading silently. They're instructions. For whom? I don't know. She translated slowly. Present version A, during discussion. She turned the page. Replace with version B before final signatures, if no objections are raised. The room fell completely silent. Nathaniel's attorney carefully took the document from her. After several long seconds, he nodded. The handwriting appears to match the revisions. Another attorney added quietly, This isn't a drafting copy. It's an execution plan. Every delegate around the table suddenly understood. There had never been one agreement. There had been 2. One intended for discussion, another intended for approval. Nathaniel closed the folder. His calm expression never changed. But everyone in the room could feel the atmosphere shift. He looked toward Mikhail. I believe today's meeting is over. Mikhail stood slowly. I think you've misunderstood the situation. Nathaniel smiled politely. No. He closed the second contract. I think I finally understand it. No one spoke. No one moved. For several seconds, the room remained frozen, between uncertainty and revelation. Then Nathaniel turned toward Elena. "You've done more for this company in the last 20 minutes than anyone could have expected." Elena smiled awkwardly. "I was only trying to prevent a misunderstanding." Nathaniel looked around the table. "I don't believe that's all you prevented." Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan continued its busy afternoon, completely unaware that a single delivery assignment had quietly changed the outcome of one of the most important negotiations of the year. And for Elena Brooks, the day that had begun with coffee cups and lunch trays was only just beginning. The conference room remained quiet long after the delegates had left. Outside the glass walls, the city continued its endless rhythm, unaware that a routine catering delivery had altered the direction of one of the year's most important international agreements. Stacks of revised contracts covered the table. Nathaniel's legal team had already confirmed every inconsistency Elena had identified. Independent translators were brought in from 2 respected language institutes, and each one reached the same conclusion. The original agreement had contained wording that could easily have been misunderstood. Had the meeting continued without interruption, the consequences would have affected every company represented that day. Instead, every clause was rewritten, reviewed together, and approved only after every delegate agreed on identical wording in all 5 languages. For the first time that afternoon, everyone shared exactly the same understanding. As the final signatures were completed, one of the senior European delegates stood. He looked toward Elena. "I've attended negotiations for more than 30 years." He smiled warmly. And today, the most important contribution didn't come from someone sitting at this table. One by one, the others followed. Some offered a handshake, others simply nodded with quiet respect. No applause was needed. The acknowledgement itself meant far more. Elena accepted each gesture with the same modest smile. "I only happened to hear something that didn't sound right." An elderly French representative chuckled softly. "No," he shook his head. "You listened when everyone else assumed they already understood." Nathaniel watched the exchange without saying a word. Respect could never be demanded. It had to be earned. And Elena had earned it from people who rarely changed their opinions. A week later, Elena returned to her normal delivery route. She expected life to continue exactly as before. Instead, her phone rang just after 9 in the morning. The caller ID displayed a name she never imagined she would see: Nathaniel Ashford. She answered cautiously. "Good morning." "Good morning, Miss Brooks." His voice carried the same calm confidence she remembered. "I hope I'm not interrupting your route." She smiled. "I have 5 minutes. I'd like to offer you a position." Elena blinked. "I appreciate that, but I don't think I'd fit into your company." "I disagree." She laughed softly. "You've only known me for 1 afternoon," Nathaniel answered without hesitation. "1 afternoon was enough to tell me how you think." There was a brief silence. "You noticed details experienced professionals overlooked. You stayed calm under pressure, and when speaking, would have been uncomfortable. You chose honesty instead." He paused. "Those qualities are much harder to teach than languages." Elena looked out at the busy street. "I don't have an impressive resume. I've never worked in international business. I didn't even finish college." Nathaniel's reply came almost immediately. "Resumes tell me where someone has been. They don't tell me what someone is capable of becoming." For the first time in years, Elena found herself speechless. Months passed. The delivery uniform disappeared, replaced by tailored business attire that still reflected her simple, approachable style. She never tried to become someone else. She remained warm, curious, patient. The same young woman who had once balanced coffee trays now coordinated multilingual meetings for executives from around the world. Whenever complicated negotiations reached an impasse, someone would inevitably say, Let's hear Elena's interpretation. Not because she spoke the most languages, but because everyone trusted her judgment. Even employees who had once questioned her appointment gradually sought her advice. Respect had quietly replaced doubt. Nathaniel noticed something else during those months. She remembered the names of receptionists. She thanked security guards before entering meetings. She stayed after conferences to help junior assistants organize documents. Success never changed the way she treated people. If anything, it made her even more thoughtful. One evening, after another successful international conference, the office building had nearly emptied. The skyline glowed beneath the setting sun. Nathaniel found Elena standing beside the windows overlooking Manhattan. "You've been avoiding going home." She smiled. "I was watching the sunset." He stood beside her. "So was I." For a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Nathaniel broke the silence. "Do you remember the first thing you said to me?" Elena laughed. "Please don't sign that." "I've replayed that moment more times than I'd like to admit." She looked at him. "I was terrified. I know. I almost walked away. But you didn't." Nathaniel's expression softened. "Most people protect themselves first. You chose to protect complete strangers." Elena shrugged gently. "My father always believed words matter." Nathaniel nodded. "I think he was right." Another comfortable silence settled between them. Then he smiled. "I offered you a position because of your talent." She raised an eyebrow. "I know. But somewhere along the way," he hesitated for the first time since she'd met him. "I started looking forward to every meeting that included you." Elena felt her cheeks warm. "I wondered how long it would take you to admit that." Nathaniel laughed quietly. "Longer than it should have." She looked out over the city before meeting his eyes again. "I'm glad you finally did." Their first kiss wasn't dramatic. There were no cameras, no audience, no grand declarations. Just two people who had slowly learned to admire one another long before they allowed themselves to fall in love. It felt honest. It felt earned. Nearly a year after the day everything changed, Ashford International hosted another global summit. Delegates from across Europe, Asia, and the Americas gathered once again around the same conference table. This time, however, something was different. Before the meeting began, Nathaniel stood. "I'd like to introduce the Director of International Communications." Every guest turned toward Elena. Some already knew her name. Others had heard the story. All of them stood to greet her. She smiled with the same quiet confidence she had carried since the beginning. Not because she had changed, but because the world had finally taken the time to see who she had always been. As the discussion began, a delegate slid a multilingual proposal across the table. Nathaniel glanced at Elena. "What do you think?" She read the first page, smiled, and looked up. "I think we should start by making sure everyone means exactly the same thing." A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Nathaniel smiled. "I couldn't agree more." Outside, the city buzzed with another ordinary day. Inside, the young woman who had once been overlooked in a delivery jacket now guided conversations between some of the world's most influential leaders. She had never needed to become someone different to deserve respect. She had simply needed one opportunity to let the world discover the person she had been all along.